Soundgarden, one of the top bands of the 90s. In this episode of Sound Stories, we dive into the genius of Soundgarden. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to Sound Stories with Byron Nash. I'm your host, Byron Nash. Episode 15. When I say I love this band, I really, really love this band. Soundgarden, one of the most iconic rock bands, alternative rock bands, whatever you want to categorize them as, grunge bands of all time. And there's a lot to cover here because they had a breadth of music and a wide catalog. I'm going to try to condense it, make it short and punchy, and just kind of talk about all the things that I love about this group. All right, so I want to get through some fun facts, some things I didn't know, some things I did know. Fun fact I didn't know was that Chris Cornell originally started out as the drummer and singer for the band, and then eventually moved to frontman to focus on the lead vocals. Had no idea. But now that I think about it, it sort of makes sense that he was so good at singing over odd time signatures because he had the understanding from being a drummer. So some quick history things. Band came out in 84. Little bit of lineup change. You had a different bass player started the band with Kim Thale and Chris Cornell. Couple lineup changes. They got signed to Sub Pop, released I think a couple EPs. They released Screaming Life in 87 and Fop in 88. Another fun fact I didn't know was that they were the first grunge band signed to a major label, which explains like that explosion of the genre, if you will, with Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam all at once. Crazy that they were all from Seattle too, but Soundgarden were the first one to kind of kick off that big interest with major labels, which I think is why it exploded so quickly. All the bands were great, but I don't think the industry was really paying attention to that style of music, and definitely weren't paying attention to Seattle at the time. So I find it really interesting that they were the first one to get signed. So they came out with Ultra Mega OK, and then the second record was Louder Than Love, and then the third record was Badmotorfinger, and fourth record, which I think is their White Album or Songs of the Key of in the Key of Life, classic, Superunknown. But when I actually discovered them, I think I was aware of Louder Than Love. I wasn't quite sure what their sound was yet. At the time, I was listening to so much metal and thrash that they were sort of in that other alternative category, which I was starting to grow into anyway, but I didn't really have a good footing on what I thought they sounded like. So I think it was 1992, I scored this cassette. I may have gotten it at Lollapalooza or I got it before Lollapalooza. I don't recall. But it had sort of it's a compilation of all the artists that were playing on the festival. And they have the song Slaves and Bulldozers. And I heard that, and it, because of my love for Sabbath, it just immediately got me into Soundgarden. So then I got Badmotorfinger and was kind of hooked from there because I loved music that had sort of a aggressive but abrasive meets sonic texture with complexity that was more like fusion but with weird time changes and all that stuff. So they had piqued my interest, and I was really trying to expand what I was listening to because I was in such a thrash metal rabbit hole that I kind of couldn't see my way out of it a little bit. So I was really open to a lot of things. Went to Lollapalooza. I mean, it had Ice Cube, Stone Temple Pilots, Luscious Jackson, Red Hot Chili Peppers headline, Ministry, Pearl Jam was on it, on the 10 record. So I got to see all those groups at the beginning of the prime of what all of that was. And it sort of was a game changer for me because I really hadn't heard music quite like that in rock. I know it was going on, but it wasn't what I was listening to. and I was so thirsty for something more. So what I love about Badmotorfinger, one, it's heavy. It's a heavy record. Um, and I mean, obviously, you can't really talk about Soundgarden without talking about Chris Cornell. But I'm going to kind of focus on the music first and then kind of wrap it up with him. What I loved about this record, because like Slaves and Bulldozers, very kind of doomy. I could hear some Sabbath influences in there. Um, the tunings were really interesting. I didn't know what they were tuned to, but I knew they weren't standard. You could just tell by the sonic. It was like a wall of sound. It was Soundgarden. It sounded like they were growing all these different, you know, sonic textures and different plants of musicality. There's acoustic, there's weird tunings, there's screeching guitars, there's unorthodox solos, and then Chris Cornell's range goes from here to here. And I didn't really hear anybody singing like that. You either had all high pitched singers or kind of like mid range people, but not, I didn't hear anyone with the range of Chris Cornell, even with Eddie Vedder and Lane Staley being as amazing as they were, range wise, Chris Cornell had the biggest gap, which was incredible. Some of the things I really love about this record is the songwriting. It was just so different. And they had no fear of twisting time and really embellishing on weird time changes, interesting bridges, really interesting arrangements. And I liked how he would do his storytelling through maybe starting in a low voice and then ending up high, or starting high and then ending up low. And that would just change the whole like dynamic. I mean, maybe that's the word I'm looking for. The music was super dynamic, but it would change the mood of it and really kind of take you deeper into the story of the character or the emotions of what he was talking about. Kim Thale doesn't get enough credit on guitar. I think what I really admired about his playing was it was really unorthodox, and it wasn't shredder, and it wasn't overly like perfect, articulate, da, 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 like kind of metal. At a certain point, metal got a little sterile. Outside of like Dimebag hitting stuff around 92, a lot of the playing, it kind of like started really sounding the same. And I always thought that Kim Thale had this sort of really big, loose, almost like the way I would imagine a storm. Like you're out on a boat and the water's kind of doing its thing, and then the wind starts picking up, and then all of a sudden the waves are enormous and violent and scary, and then it could calm down. And that's how it's playing. It just seemed to be really interwoven with where the song was going, where Chris was, the range of the guitars, and everything about it. So I always thought his lead playing was so interesting. And then the two guitars together, I mean, I don't even know how Chris Cornell played and sang half that stuff. It's really, really powerful. Um, and then, I mean, you definitely can't skip over Matt Cameron. I mean, that guy, he's just a monster on the drums, a monster. Straight grooves, jazz grooves, swing grooves, time changes, fusion grooves, regular rock grooves, funky grooves. Like he had all the things, but he had all the technicality, but his technicality had feel. And I think there's a difference. There's like people who have chops, and then there's people who have feel, and there's people who have feel, and people who have chops together. And I feel like he was one of those people because even though he was doing a lot of complex things, it always lent itself to the song. And I always felt that Matt Cameron is definitely one of the top rock drummers, period, hands down. Then we move on to this record. Like so, I was already a fan with Superunknown, but by the time this came out in '94, Soundgarden was pretty big at this point. But they were big, but then there's Superunknown big. And I think a lot of that had to do with the styles of their videos was part of it. Chris had cut his hair, so there was like a shift in the alternative movement because grunge didn't really last as long as people think. It was a very short window that was considered the grunge era. I don't even consider Superunknown to be a grunge record. I actually don't really think of Soundgarden or most of those bands as grunge. There's grungy things in there. Maybe their EPs, the early stuff, but this is like incredible songwriting. I think it's beyond grunge. I think that would minimize the genius of the work that they did. And I think that's why a lot of those bands got tired of that title. It's like it was such a pigeonholed thing that, and so many bands came out sounding like that after the title had gotten big, that I think a lot of groups were trying to move away from that just to keep their identity. Superunknown, that's got bangers like Fell on Black Days, probably Black Hole Sun, and Spoon Man, I guess would be the biggest songs. But then there's other songs on there that the writing is so in depth. The production really took a big leap. It's warm, it's heavy. Um, it almost has some microtonal feels to it. I love how acoustics mixed in there, and it seems like that record in particular, they focused more on what Chris Cornell's voice was doing for the song. Not that they didn't before, but it was definitely more vocal forward. Um, and the music wasn't secondary, but it did have this feeling like, all right, not that he was the star outside of the band, but the songs just took a different feel being focused on the vocals, which I mean, you should. If that's your singer, you should focus on the vocals, all day. After that, I think alternative music was going through a weird change because it just was in the 90s. At this point, it's like 96 or whatever. And then they put out Down on the Upside before they disbanded the band. I know that album, Kim Thales reported to say that like everything seemed like it was always about the vocals. So I think there were some creative differences in the direction of where the band was going. And there was also like a critical acclaim pressure because Superunknown was so freaking huge that when Down on the Upside came out, I don't remember, it did a few million. It didn't do the same amount as Superunknown, but whatever it did, it still should be considered a really successful record. And it was almost considered like a fall off, and it wasn't. Musically, it definitely wasn't. And I feel like if you sell anything over 2 million records or whatever, especially back then, that's pretty successful. So imagine being, you're grinding it out for years and years, and then you get to this point, 10 years later, you have the biggest record of your life, and then you put out another record, and it's almost like considered like a fall off, and it's amazing. And you sold millions. That is confusing to me. I think that would be really confusing as an artist too, because now you're kind of looking at like, what am I doing? Like, are you telling me that 4 million records is bad? So I think all those things were going on. There was probably internal band things and other stuff with addiction and all other things that come with rock and roll. So I consider that the last great Soundgarden record, not because the ones when they got back together weren't good. Those are just sort of the classics to me, if you will. So before we get to my top 10, I actually ended up with 12, but top 10 Soundgarden songs that I definitely want to hear your list too, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crossover. I wanted to take it back for a second and talk about the side projects. So at the same time of discovering Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, I was already in Alice in Chains because they were on the Clash of the Titans tour with Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax. They were sort of my first grunge band, if you will. I really just consider them a great rock band. But that said, Temple of the Dog, let's talk about that for a second. That record, I think that record almost showcases another side of Chris Cornell's power, genius, ability for songwriting, and to be in a different space. So, you have Mike McCready from Pearl Jam, you had Eddie Vedder, Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, and you have Matt Cameron on drums and Jeff Ament on bass. I I think that's one of the best records. I wish I could like stick that in between Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and give it a little arc because I feel like Temple of the Dog is such a powerful record. Chris sings his face off. I mean, face melts the whole time. And that record for me, I would put it almost up against Pearl Jam 10. Don't be mad at me. I love Pearl Jam 10. I love Pearl Jam. But something about them together, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that comparison because it's not equal vocals all the way across. But because it's so Pearl Jammy in the music, maybe it is a fair comparison. Let me know what you guys think. So the side projects were Temple of the Dog, Hater, Well-Water Conspiracy, and probably the most popular would be Audioslave. I wasn't sure how Audioslave was going to land at first, only because it's sort of, you have the three guys from Rage, so you kind of know what you're going to get. Like you know the rhythm section's going to be there. You know you're going to kind of have a quiet to loud big riff thing, and I wasn't sure because I was so used to Rage with Zach and the rapping. Um, where did Chris fit in that? And then they put that song out. They put that video out. Whoa! I was like, oh God, this can work. This can really work. And again, same thing, having the range like a stone where he's kind of monotone and barely opens his mouth in the verses and then really explodes in the choruses, and then just the power of how those riffs hit with his voice. He has this powerful scream, he has the high pitch, he has the mid range, the harmonies. It worked. I mean, Audioslave, that both records I think were incredible. I think they did two, right? Or maybe it was three. I don't remember. If I had to pick one of the side projects that's my favorite for all time listening, it would be Temple of the Dog, hands down. Temple, Audioslave, Well Water, and then Hater. And I don't even know that much about Hater, so I just added it to the list so I wouldn't forget. Here we go. What are your top 10 Soundgarden songs of all time? List them in the comments. I'm really curious. I'd love to hear from you. Here's mine. Black Hole Sun, 4th of July, Mailman, Fell on Black Days, Jesus Christ Pose, Louder Than Love, Holy Water, Slaves and Bulldozers. Ah, man, this is hard. Pretty Noose, Blow Up, The Outside World, Hunted Down. And if I had like some bonus songs to throw in there, it would be Kickstand. I love Kickstand for some reason. It's really short and it's punchy. I think it's like less than 2 minutes long. It sounds like one take. They just crush it. Something about the condensed power and energy of that song just blow my mind. So that's my list. I want to know about yours. I remember I was bartending and we would always play like an album at the end of the night to kind of get us through the work. And people were calling names. We were going to do Slayer and all these different things. And I was like, ooh, how about Superunknown? And everyone's like, oh my God, I haven't listened to that in forever. So we listened to the whole record to clean the bar. And then the next morning I woke up, my GM had texted me that Chris Cornell had passed away. And I was terribly upset. Like something about hearing the music the night before and then waking up to that. And what was interesting about it is that we weren't really going to listen to that. Like we were leaning into like Motorhead and like kind of heavy grinding out stuff. And it was almost like there was a spirituality component that compelled me to want to hear that. And I was sad, like I lost a family member, because he's been such a big part of my life. Rest in peace to Chris Cornell, and I want to thank him and Soundgarden for all the beautiful music that you guys have created over the years. With that, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, click the button, do all the cool things, growing the channel one episode at a time, and I really appreciate you checking it out. I'm signing off. Peace.